All right. Settle down, everyone. Today, for the next 30 minutes or so, 40 minutes, we're going to be talking about the blockchain technology in the context of centralized security depositories. So really, the plumbing of the international financial markets and the potential applications of this type of technology in that space. My name is Mark Hochstein. I am the editor-in-chief of American Banker. I have been an avid student of Bitcoin and all that it's spawned for the last few years. I think it's a very interesting area. I'm going to ask each of the panelists, the practitioners up here on stage with me, to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll start the conversation. Starting on my far right with Artem.
Yeah, I'm Artem Dovanov, Head of Innovation, National Settlement Depository, that's settlement depository of Russia, located in Moscow.
And so that would roughly be the Russian equivalent of our DTCC? Is that a fair way to think about it?
Likely,
Right.
yeah.
Jill?
My name is Jill Carlson. I run market strategy at Chain, which is a blockchain technology startup. We sell software licenses to the likes of NASDAQ, Citi, State Street, and many others to implement their own blockchain technology networks.
Monica.
And my name is Monica Singer. I'm the CEO and founder of Straight, and Straight is the central securities depository for all transactions on market and off market for equities, bonds, money market instruments, collateral in the South African market. And the company was created 20 years ago, and we are categorized, South Africa is categorized by the World Economic Forum as the top third country in the world in terms of the efficiencies we have introduced to the financial markets.
And I'm Fredrik Voss. I'm part of NASDAQ's Blockchain Innovation Initiative.
And most of us here know what the NASDAQ is. So, that's great. So before we kind of get into the use case here, one thing that I think would be helpful to review just to level set the conversation. In this panel, we're not going to be talking a whole lot about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, sadly, because that's fascinating stuff. We're going to be talking. We're not going to be talking about these open networks. We're going to be talking primarily, I would imagine, about permissioned blockchain networks. Jill, could you just give everyone a refresher on what that means when we're talking about different types of blockchains and distributed ledgers? What do we mean by permissioned?
Yeah, thank you. So, of course, on the one hand, you have public open networks such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many others. And of course, what they're solving is something very different from the likes of what, for example, Chain's customers or global CSDs want to solve. And fundamentally, when you're talking about implementing blockchain technology in an existing financial network or an existing financial enterprise, what you're talking about is existing assets, so not cryptocurrencies. You're talking about securities, payments, currencies that we already deal with today, but a new way of moving them on this technology platform.
Great, that was very helpful. So I'm going to ask each of the representatives of the CSDs to describe what's the problem that you're trying to solve here. You know, what is the thing that needs to be fixed, and why is this thing we call blockchain potentially an appropriate solution? And we'll start with Fredrik. You know, what's the NASDAQ trying to solve for here?
Well, I'm not really part of the CSD group
Yeah,
here,
but in the financial market infrastructure.
So for us, I mean, for NASDAQ, which is really a financial technology company, most of us knows us as an exchange, but we're really a financial technology company. We actually have a large portfolio of similar initiatives to the one we have for blockchain, you know, machine intelligence, augmented reality, even computer chip design. We work with that kind of stuff. And the common theme across those is sort of the generic quest for increased productivity, increased efficiency, but also trying to explore the possibility of identifying new business models, alternative market structures. So it is about making things, you know, actually better, and also provide opportunities to create new kinds of businesses that haven't been available before. And obviously, blockchain technology has some very powerful features that are new to capital markets. So we're looking at how can those be explored and used and put the best use for our clients and clients' clients in capital markets. And one area is, of course, the keeping track of who owns what, which is sort of a fundamental part of what a CSD does.
And what's wrong with the way things are, that's tracked right now?
I don't think anything is wrong with it, because you have to remember that the current model that we have is based on the technology that has been available up until now. I think it's more about, so given that, I think current CSDs are incredibly efficient, they are reliable, they are strong, it works, they can support these huge transaction volumes that we've seen developing over the last 20 years. But the question is, does the new technology offer new ways of addressing traditional problems? But actually, are we now able to address problems or needs that we almost didn't know we had before? So I think it's more about the innovation than actually correcting what has been wrong. We have to recognize we have maybe a new tool in the toolbox.
Monica, why is Straight interested in this area?
First of all, I'm going to tell you a little story. 20 years ago, I was involved in eliminating the physical world, the share certificates, the checks from the South African market. So I eliminated paper and I converted everything to digital. At that time, in an innocent way, I said to the banks and the stock exchange that were my bosses, I said, why can the CSD not have the ownership and the transparency of the records of who owns what? 20 years ago, the world of financial markets was very secretive, and everything was behind a nominee company. So everybody said, no, we will have our own records, and you will never own that information. So everything was put in a nominee account. They also said, no technology can cope with such volumes of transactions. We need to net and we need to hide. Then I said, why can we not use the internet? No, you will go to Swift and you will make sure that you will pay high fees and all these mainframes and all this crazy stuff. I'll give you another example, which I thought it was crazy. You have one computer here, another computer here. Do you know the message goes from this computer all the way from South Africa to Brussels and back to this computer? Really? Okay. And everybody charges a lot of fees. So I thought, but why not? Because the internet is not secure. So imagine having to deal with all these bankers, and I'm like, really? I couldn't understand this. So then some years ago, I saw blockchain, and I thought, wow, this is the revenge of the nerds. Think about it. We're going to resolve all the problems that we couldn't resolve 20 years ago because of all these people in suits told me I couldn't do it, and I'm going to say, now we're going to do it. We have transparency, we have security, we have an audit trail. We don't need so much reconciliations. And I didn't tell you, everybody and the mothers became an intermediary. Now, really? I give you an example. We created Straight, and I thought that one of the ones that had to be eliminated was the registrars, you know? Because Straight did the work of a registrar. Trust me, we have more registrars, transfer secretaries, or whatever you call it in your language, we have more now than we had 20 years ago. Really? Why? So what happened was that everybody wanted a piece of the pie. So all of that is unnecessary in a blockchain environment because you want to go from peer-to-peer. So yes, there are challenges because this is a new technology, but even what you have achieved, let's be honest, okay? Let's talk honesty here. The NASDAQ solution is wonderful because it will create this new ability to see things, but it's a little bit backwards. Why? Because what we have achieved is central bank funds. Settlement in central bank funds is secure because a central bank doesn't fail. Commercial bank funds, meaning connectivity with one bank, Citibank, that's going backwards in terms of risk management. So it's a good beginning, but it's not where we want to end. We really want to end in central bank funds, and that's why this technology will have to evolve, that the central banks will have to embrace it and put the fiat currency in the blockchain, and that will achieve a higher level of assurance than commercial bank funds. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, to cut a long story short, it is evolution, not revolution, because financial markets don't cope with drastic changes. That's why we're talking about permission, private. We cannot go into the ideal yet. You must take markets slowly and surely and prove all the time that it works.
Yeah, very well said. You know, the word revolution gets thrown around a lot, and it's a pet peeve of mine because in reality, revolutions are violent, bloody affairs, and evolution itself is brutal enough in nature. Artem, from your perspective in Russia, you know, what is the potential that you see in this technological space, and what are the problems that you're trying to solve?
Thank you. Yeah, very good question. Actually, I think the main one. Yeah. So we have been trying to answer it for 1 year, I think, since we started. So how we look at this question at an efficiency at this moment? What is financial market infrastructure? Yeah. So we as CSD, we stay in the center of it, but basically it consists of lots of other organizations. Yes, so like custodians, banks, brokers. Yes. So, and if you look at each individual organization, they are very, very efficient. Yes. So we've spent many years, lots of money just to make us very, very efficient. Yes. So if taken individually. Yes. So if you look at the whole system. Yes, so I mean the whole financial market infrastructure, which consists in Russia, that's about 300 depositories, for example. Yes, so which interact to each other through messaging. Yes, so in general, it is not so efficient as it could be. Yes, so and blockchain, it is actually about bringing efficiency to the system as a whole. Yes, so via elimination of reconciliation. Yes, so making faster transactions and so on. So that's how we look at that. Yes. So and why we are actually taking some steps in this area, because as central settlement depository, we are responsible for making the whole market more efficient. Yes. So that's one of our mission actually.
Now, I keep hearing the word efficiency quite a bit in these type of conversations. Understand that we're not talking about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. I mean, in many, you know, but if your only frame of reference is Bitcoin, you might question some of that because, you know, Bitcoin is, in a sense, it's not efficient in the sense that, you know, you have all these computers, devoting all this computational power and all this electricity to securing the network and securing the ledger, and generally this whole idea of, you know, everyone, every node reaching consensus on what the state of reality is, rather than just one central party just doing that, would seem to be to the person from Mars just landing in this space inefficient. Jill, what are the efficiencies? When we talk about efficiency, what do we mean in this context?
Yeah, so just to come back quickly to this question of what does a permissioned blockchain look like versus public. Something that you touched on there, I think, is in reference to like the proof of work algorithms that Bitcoin and Ethereum rely on. You know, when you look at permissioned blockchains, very rarely are they relying on those kinds of algorithms. And very rarely would it make sense to even. You know, if you look at what goes on in Bitcoin, yes, of course you have to elect a miner through some sort of pseudo-random process, which in that case is proof of work. If you look at, for example, the algorithm that Chain uses, we don't use one. We instead designate whoever the network operator is. So for example, in the case of NASDAQ, it's NASDAQ to play that role. Of course, you can still gain some of the decentralized and distributed properties of the network that do offer the efficiencies that we are talking about. And specifically what those efficiencies are, as Monica mentioned, disintermediation, specifically disintermediation of settlement, so enabling a more peer-to-peer real-time settlement process. And of course, along with that comes this dual process of both perfect transparency or auditability and also perfect confidentiality and privacy, which is a question that we often get in this space. You know, it's a non-starter, obviously, in capital markets to have a system or a process that doesn't offer privacy and confidentiality. But those two things actually can be enabled by the advancements in cryptography that we've seen over the last few years. So those are some of the more kind of exciting value propositions of the tech.
I want to get back to this theme of disintermediation because something that we've seen in the fintech space broadly, even outside of blockchain, fintech a couple years ago meant startups that were competing head-on with the established financial institutions, and and some of these were companies that achieved scale, lending, especially in the lending space, Lending Club, et cetera. Some of these, have had trouble acquiring customers. And the second wave of fintech was more about helping the legacy financial institutions get better at what they do. So, is disintermediation really something that we ought to be talking about in this context? Is that the right theme, or is it more about just changing the business models of the players that exist, or some combination?
I would love to answer that.
Yeah.
I truly believe that it would be short-sighted to say, disintermediate the CSDs, for example. We have, through the financial crisis, shown that we were the ones that deliver the stability to the financial markets. The stock markets were closing down. The CSDs carry on processing. We had the records, we had the ability, the connectivity, the DVP, all of that. Plus, the one thing we have is a massive credibility with the regulators. So in previous panels, I heard about the challenges that everybody's facing to talk to regulators. I'm saying, talk to us. We open all, isn't it true? We open the doors. You talk to your central bank as if like you have tea every day. Us too, we write the rules and regulations. We are what is called a self-regulating organization. That means our regulators delegated to Straight the ability to regulate the banks. So the banks are my shareholders, my clients, my board members, and I also find them. So imagine I'm not popular. So I always say I'm not running a popularity contest. The point is that we mustn't lose sight of throwing the baby with the bathwater. Here you've got the perfect financial market infrastructure. Those that have embraced the CSDs like Russia and us, that have embraced blockchain, DLT, as the big thing that is going to change the world, we are going to be the ones that, in partnership with the techies, we can truly change the world. Because you know what, when CSDs get together, I promise you, it's never about making money, it's about how do we make financial markets more secure. It is a beautiful energy, and we have incredible amount of synergy between all of us around the world. We organize in regions, but we work together. So it's really, imagine that energy. And now we found the right technology that will help us truly meet that objective of making the world a more secure place.
I think you also have to think about disintermediation of what? We're talking about disintermediation of like legal entities. I don't think that's sort of the interesting question. It is what processes, procedures, workflow can humanity live without? If we have better ways of solving those needs, okay, let's not do those. But, implementing a new technology and new market structures, which is really what we're talking about. Ultimately, technology is just an enabler of alternative business models, alternative ways of doing things. That comes with our own processes, procedures, and workflows, and not everything a CSD, not the only thing a CSD do is sort of updating a ledger and reconcile it with other ledgers. There is so much more going into what a CSD do, or a CCP do, or a bank, or a broker. So intermediaries do more than that, but are there certain processes, activities, workflows that all of these participants do that may become redundant in the future world? Yes, definitely. Does that mean that legal entity go away? In certain cases, possibly. But does it have to be like that? No, not at all. It's really about who grasps the opportunity and sort of goes with it. And that can be Straight, or it could be us, or it could be someone completely new that we haven't heard about today. And
Something I would just jump in there as well. When I think about what a CSD does today, it's not just obviously updating ledgers. It's dematerializing securities or immobilizing securities and assets. And let me tell you, as someone who sits there and thinks every day about how can we build a blockchain network on the existing financial infrastructure, the first question we always ask ourselves is, how can we get assets onto this network, right? Because you're not just going to sit here and ask NASDAQ, right, rip and replace your entire existing public equities infrastructure, right? Because fundamentally, even if NASDAQ was willing to do that today, which their great innovative minds might be, you have to migrate somehow those securities onto that new exchange platform. And so, at Chain, this is the work that we've done with Citi in getting payments onto a blockchain network. Citi fundamentally is serving that role in a way of immobilizing assets and then issuing them onto a new network. And that's the role that I see CSDs playing in the future. It's not about disintermediating them, but it's just about a new infrastructure for what you're already doing.
And I give you an example. We had a meeting in London last week for CSDs, DTCC, Canada, the Canadian one, Russia and ourselves, facilitated by Ernst & Young. And we said, okay, what are the pain points? What are the things that we wish we could have fixed? But let's use blockchain. Actually, let's decide if blockchain is the right technology for this new idea that we came up with. And EY has got this a tool that can tell you if it's feasible to put it into the blockchain. So we came up with some ideas.
A tool like a if this then that kind of thing?
Yeah. So it tells you if it's a good idea to put it in the blockchain, if it's feasible.
Is that tool itself on a blockchain? Or?
Not yet.
Not yet.
So, but the beauty, imagine DTC, Canada, Russia, South Africa, coming up with ideas that will resolve the problem of the world financial markets by CSDs, jointly. So, and because remember, this new technology is internet-based, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Once you come up with a solution, it doesn't matter. Do you see how powerful it is?
Yes, but we still live in an age of national sovereignty. In fact, we're in a sense, we're going back more towards that. Let's talk about regulatory frameworks here. Artem, what are the conversations like that you're having with the Russian central bank and the Russian regulators, and what are the kind of things that need to be in place for this technology to really go into production?
Actually, I think we're very, very lucky, because our central bank is very vocal and active in this field. So they even created FinTech Association. And one of four, I would say, areas which this association is covering, that's blockchain. So, and within this association, regulator together with financial market players are trying to answer the question, so what are the best actually process and areas to apply blockchain? So that's one area. Another area which is probably just started, that's the question, what should be changes within regulation? So basically to adopt blockchain. There are two levels. One level, it's about the whole regulation system of Russia, not only about financial markets, and there are discussions how we can address that, whether it should be kind of blockchain law or some blockchain standard. So how blockchain should look like on the highest level, of regulation. And then the next area of discussion is with central bank, so in terms of more local areas, like for security, for example. We have security law, so what are changes to be done in this law, to adopt blockchain? I would say that at this moment, we don't see any real, I will say, legal obstacles, and we don't see any resistance from central bank, because they say, like, we don't actually regulate technology, we regulate processes, So basically for them, blockchain is just new technology, so why not to use it? So if it requires some changes, why not to, in regulation, why not to do that? So we are constantly doing some changes in regulation, so to adopt new processes, or to introduce new services. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, we made huge changes in regulation, to support corporate actions reform, so that was initiated by us, supported by central bank, And that was a huge change to Russian financial market.
Now, here in the States, what needs to happen on the regulatory level?
Yeah, because I think that's relevant, because you need to be a little bit more specific than just saying sort of laws and regulations around the world, because it differs.
Yeah.
Laws differ, regulations differ, and we, of course, being NASDAQ with our tentacles all over the world in capital markets, we work with many different legislators and regulators. It's CFTC, it's SEC, it's ESMA, the local European regulators, but also a few in Asia. But if you do want to generalize a little bit, I think the issue at hand is not about the risk of legal regulatory prohibition of these initiatives. It's actually about that if you overlay some of these new alternative business models, new ways of organizing your markets on top of existing laws and regulations, you see that there are actually gaps in the laws and regulations. So it's more about the legal uncertainty of deploying these models in an existing world, that they somehow should be prohibited. So I think in order to pave the way for a wide-scale adoption of this technology in capital markets, you need to see legal and regulatory innovation happen in parallel with the technical innovation. And we see a great deal of ambition on that. I mean, we had CFTC the other day announcing the CFTC Lab. You have the regulatory sandbox in the UK. You have other initiatives. The EU has a sort of fintech group now, and they are represented here. So there is a strong ambition from the legal and regulatory side to actually not be in the way. It is not that they are actually saying this is much better than the alternative. I think they have sort of a neutral approach to that. But now one is sort of the promises that this new technology brings are difficult to bring to fruition and into the real world because the uncertainty about it. And investors are not going to allocate billions worth of assets into market structures where there is uncertainty about the status of the transaction. Just a very, very simple thing like the Settlement Finality Directive in the EU. Are transactions on the blockchain covered by that? Or can a bankruptcy lawyer go in and claw back, half of a transaction? So it's more about that actually than there is a prohibition around these things.
The other thing you must understand, CSDs around the world are all guided by the same principles. It's called CPSS IOSCO principles. So any regulator, whatever you want to do, whatever, in the blockchain, not in the blockchain, will always ask you, have you complied with those principles? The principles are just risk management principles. So as long as you can answer those questions, then you're okay. And like Artem said, this is just another technology. So the only thing that is still, and absolutely agree with you, what we do is we bring the lawyers with us to the conversations on technology so that they can evolve, in their minds as to how to write the new regulations in the legalese that is required. But in reality, it's complementary to what we already have in place. So I think that the legal framework that we all abide by is very strong. The pillars are there. This is going to be on top. So it's not that we need to delete. When I converted physical to digital, you don't understand how complex that was. We even had a law in South Africa that it was called the Stamp Duty Act. It said every time that you buy a share, you need to buy a stamp, lick it, put it on the share certificate, and that's how the government collected their taxes. And that said, lick a stamp, So we had to eliminate that legislation, and we invented one called Uncertificated Securities Tax Act, meaning the tax will be collected by just an entry in a digital record, no? So that was complex. This scenario is not complex. Why? Because we already are in the digital world. This is just a beautiful technology that improves on what we have at the moment. So when people go into fiat that, oh my gosh, we need the law, and to tell you the truth, when I converted from physical to digital, I went ahead even without the legislation, because you have to create the imagination first.
You would do well in Silicon Valley, it
I
sounds
know,
like.
I know.
You beg,
No, no, no.
you beg forgiveness rather than ask permission.
Of course, that's my motto. Isn't it true? It's so true.
This is sounding more like a Bitcoin conference than I expected.
No, but the truth is that you have to first create before anybody writes rules and standards, because people cannot even imagine what you're creating until they touch and see it. Isn't it true?
Yeah.
You know? So don't let the lawyers loose, you control them, you know?
I think we would be remiss to talk about regulation in blockchain as well, though, without talking about some of the upside that I think regulators really do see here. You know, not only around transparency and auditability, but something I came across the other day, for example, is in the United States, there's a write once, read many compliance standard that the SEC has. And today, apparently, custodians and all kinds of financial institutions have to use specific hardware to accomplish this. If you look at something like a blockchain protocol that's immutable, that's built into the data model of the ledger. And so, you know, I think that we really should give due credit to regulators for really seeing the upside of this technology and getting behind it pretty quickly.
Write once, read many, that predated all of this stuff.
Oh, yeah. This grew out of, I believe, 2008, SEC.
And what did it mean in that context? Because it sounds like a blockchain, but
yeah, it does indeed.
What did it mean in the
blockchain,
context coming out of the 2008 crisis?
So it's about data persistency. So it's about custodians having to keep data around in such a form that a regulator can come in and audit what's gone on the books and know that it hasn't been tampered with or changed by anyone who might have access to that data. Now, of course, it's solved already in a blockchain, but today there's special hardware. I mean, if you think about even like a CDR disk, you know, where it's read only, you can't write to it again. It's like that, but of course in a much more kind of mission critical enterprise grade format.
You know, that actually brings me to what I think is a very interesting question to sort of talk through as a thought experiment. So there will probably be another financial crisis at some point. All with due respect to the Dodd-Frank Act. But when that happens, if these new technologies are implemented before then, and we have the securities markets leveraging these new types of technologies, how does that play? How does a 2008 style scenario play out differently? If all this is built.
I heard a quote by one of the American regulators saying that if we had blockchain technology before the 2008 crisis, instead of taking 8 years to find out, you know, the positions that Lehman had around the world, this could have been done, you know, maybe in a day. And that is, in a way, what we're trying to achieve, you know, is that the trade repository, I'm sure you heard about a trade repository, over-the-counter derivatives transactions, where the exposures are huge around the world, and there was never one number. It's called the LEI, the Legal Identity Identifier. There was not one number that would identify a legal entity around the world. So that's what we're trying to achieve now, that we have technology that would give you transparency, complete audit trail of the records very fast. So that's why the world has to move to a transparency-based world. And yes, I know that, like, you know, the CEO of Fidelity said today that for clients it's important confidentiality. Yes, but for the regulators it's important the transparency. I'll give you another example. The regulators, at least in South Africa, the Registrar of Banks gets these returns from the banks on a monthly basis to assess liquidity and solvency risk. Imagine if they become a node in the computer of the bank, they can get real-time information of what's going on in a bank, and therefore they can put artificial intelligence to that information and immediately will tell you if the bank is at risk, if there's a solvency or liquidity issue, and therefore crises can be averted much faster.
Frederick, how do you see it played out?
Yeah, so, I mean, there are different dimensions to regulation. One is, of course, investor and consumer protection. We have regulation around that. A lot of focus after 2008 has, of course, been about systemic risk and identification of concentration risk and addressing them. And I think And this remains to be proven, of course, but if this technology can be leveraged in a way where we give greater insight to society, because that is what it's about, through regulators, usually into the formation or of these concentration risk or systemic risks, that is when this technology can play a significant difference. Of course, if there is an event and you get greater insights into who owns what and you can resolve that quicker, that's good. But when it could be potentially really meaningful is if you can actually help somehow us in society to identify that, whoa, we have a bit of an event. There is a volcano here that is about to explode. So you get a bit of forewarning and potentially address it. Then it becomes really helpful. Is that going to happen? Maybe. Who knows? That definitely remains to be proven. But I think that would be a significant difference that you asked for. But we're not quite there yet.
Jill, is some friction desirable in financial markets? I mean, we talk about speeding up settlements. If we went to if we had a T+0 settlement in a financial crisis, wouldn't that accelerate things? I mean, how do you?
In fact, I think it wouldn't, because really, I mean, when you think about what the financial crisis grew out of, it was in part actually confusion about where the assets were, keeping track of that ownership, keeping track of really specifically leverage in the system. And so having, as Monica alluded to, the possibility of a real-time data feed of the bank's liquidity situations, of real-time stress testing as a possibility, real-time keeping track of counterparty risk, I think that really only reduces systemic risk in the system. And to me, I started my career on Wall Street in the wake of 2008, and that to me has been something that is really exciting about this technology, is the ability to reduce that systemic risk that was not possible until today.
And I'll give you the last word, Artem. How does a crisis play out if we're on a blockchain?
Sorry?
How would a crisis situation be different if we had this technology in place?
I prefer be very cautious about making statements that actually any technology could prevent crisis. I think that's the root of crisis. That's more in our minds. Yeah. So because blockchain, if we talk specifically about blockchain, that's more about actually record ownership. Yeah. So that's primary purpose of this technology, and I don't see how it could help actually. Yeah. So to prevent crises like we have. Yeah,
but would it make them more or less painful?
I really doubt. Yeah. So what I think about is that any big technology, disruptive technology, yes, it solves some problems. Yeah. So for example, for blockchain, I believe that the area which can be addressed, that's like customer protection. Yeah. So that's great for customers actually, this blockchain. But as any other technology, as internet, for example, it solves some problems, but it brings many new problems, like this lack of privacy that we have now. And the question for me, what actually blockchain would bring, yes, in terms of new risks and new problems.
And on that optimistic note,
Yeah.
I think we're going to wrap it up. But this has been a really interesting conversation. It's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks to Consensus.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.